Hello, my name's Allison and welcome back. For today's video, I'll be talking about my process into my most recent animatic. And I'll be adding a little me in today's video too, because I want to try it out for what I wanted this video to look like. So yeah, if it works out and you guys like it, I can see if I can do something similar for my other speed paint videos. And yeah, let's get started. When I have an idea for an animatic and have the audio picked out, I start with writing. If the audio has a transcript like lyrics to a song, I'll just copy and paste it into a Word document. Or I'll just manually type out the dialogue like I had to do for my most recent animatic. Then underneath that dialogue, I'll type out what I want the camera shots to look like. Then character actions and expressions, then the timing of said actions to match up with the audio, and finally, how many frames I want that line of dialogue to have. Then after writing all that down, next up is thumbnail sketches. For thumbnail sketches, I'll create these small rectangles that have the same ratio as a 1920 by 180 pixels, which is the dimensions I use for my YouTube videos. And the rectangle acts as the frame. Everything inside it is going to be in frame, and then everything outside of it will not be. And the sketches I do for the characters are super simple. Just a circle and a rectangle to indicate the character. And to make sure everything was correct for the world around these characters, I drew out a quick map of how I want the inside of Marvin and Jackie's home to look like. I also wrote in what the dialogue that is being said for each frame, and some notes about the camera shot in red and outside of the frame. And for closer shots, I'll add in their expression too. Then I made each rectangle to take up the entire canvas and started to refine the sketch. Refining the sketch is the second longest part in creating the animatic. This is when I started adding in details, starting with the background, and I did this by using the perspective grid and some reference photos I took of my own home to make it easier on myself. And this part of the process is actually different compared to my greatest show animatic, because in that one, I did not worry about the background till after all the characters were finished being colored, which caused some issues such as placement of the characters and a boring background. So this time, the background came first, which I am pretty happy with, and because this home I was drawing is Marvin and Jackie's place, I also wanted to look like this was something they both lived in. So for the first background, I had these rose bushes in the front that Marvin took care of. I had a July calendar that had a star where Jackie's birthday would be, Marvin's deck of cards, and post-it notes between the two. Then for the third background with the pentagram, I had it as a hallway to their living room, where you can see Rufus, Jackie's death omen dog, sleeping on the couch, Jackie's superhero mug, and his superhero mask. And I was originally going to have these two Marvel posters behind the TV, but felt like it made it too complicated, so I didn't do that. And one last detail I added to the background was the last one with Auntie in it, where you can see the trans and ace flag hung up. And I did that because my version of Jackie is a trans male, and my version of Marvin is ace. Then after the backgrounds, I started working on the characters by adding in their expressions and extra details. This is also around the time I took all these frames and put them into After Effects. And then once in After Effects, I'll mess with how long I want the frames to last and match it up to the audio. After that, I'll go back to Procreate and either add or fix frames. Then I finish up with sketching the characters, and I sticked with the design I used for Chase and Nancy for this animatic. But for Marvin, because he's at his house, I drew him wearing a more comfy Ace of Spades sweater with his blue button-up shirt poking out. Oh, and with the original TikTok that this is based off of, the pentagram was just a regular pentagram. But for this animatic, since it's supposed to summon Auntie, I had 5 knives stabbing at the 5 star points, and a little Sam septic in the middle. And another detail I added to the first background is drawing a food and water bowl that Rufus would eat out of. And finally, the refined sketches were finished. And after getting the refined sketches finished and finalized, and finalizing the timing on After Effects, I started working on the line art. With line art, I'm just redrawing lines, so this part didn't take too long to do. And there's not really much to talk about for this part. But I guess how I make sure the line art looks just as good as the sketch is by lowering the opacity for the sketch layer as low as possible. So when I start working on the line art, it can be seen way more easily than the sketch layer, allowing me to find any mistakes and fix them. That way I don't run into the problem of the sketch layer looking better than the line art later. Once the line art is finished, I went on to adding the base color. The base colors took the longest, mostly because of trying to figure out the color palette for the background. And as inspiration for the background colors, I used a color palette for an older art piece of mine, in which I drew Jackie sleeping against Marvin on their couch, while Marvin plays Animal Crossing. And just to kind of show how this animatic and the art piece happen in the same place. So I ended up using the same color palettes between the two. And to kind of go again with the background, the reason why I chose to have the rose bushes, he looks after, and so it can kind of match his whole magician aesthetic. And maybe that's something he and Jackie will do, just keep around these little succulent plants to liven up the place. Though they'll probably have to keep them up high on counters just to make sure Rufus or Marvin's will-o-wisps don't accidentally knock them down. And the next up is the final line art. Because if I do a line art, I add in another layer of liner to make the character pop out, while also making sure those purple details can be seen. And this part is just a bunch of tedious work, so good, not a lot to talk about for it. But oh yeah, so I'll add in the second layer of liner for the character. But I don't do that for the background, and just leave the first layer for the background, for the line art of the background on overlay, which allows the character to pop out. And one thing I did wish I did was to put in a white layer above the background and lower the opacity to try and make the characters pop out even more. But I'm still pretty happy with how this turned out. And now the last thing I did for the frames in Procreate is shading. Shading is also a pretty quick process when I'm working on animatics. I only use one overlay layer mode and a dark purple, which allows me to get all the shading done in one go. And then for a shorter animatic like this, I had all the frames on one Procreate file. So I just worked on Chase, then went to Marvin, then finally Auntie. But for the Greatest Show animatic, because of all the effects and liner and shading I wanted to work on for it, and the fact that there were 200 individual frames, I had to split the frames into 68 different Procreate files, which I probably didn't have to do if I used the 1920 by 180 pixels dimension instead of the 10 by 12 inches dimensions I used. Which is another thing I kept in mind for this animatic as well, is to use the 19 by 20 by 180 dimensions. So the video actually fits a whole screen and you don't get this large section of black bars. And then after the shading, all that was left to work on was the intro, explaining where the audio is from, and the characters, and the end card. Which was another thing I wanted to add on after working on the Greatest Show animatic. Which also meant figuring out the title for this animatic too. And originally, instead of naming it Miscommunication, I was going to name it Marvin Pulls a Gamer Move, but I wasn't too sure on it, so maybe I'll name this video that. And then finally back to After Effects. After getting the frames into After Effects, I was pretty much done, and all that was left was adding in final glitch effects for Auntie. And that is the process into working on this animatic. Oh, and I am planning on working on a new song animatic about the Death Omen ego story. I just need to figure out which song to use first. But yeah, that's all for me. Hopefully this speed paint was helpful in looking into my process. And thank you for watching. Remember to don't overwork yourself and have an amazing day.